Over to you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Welcome, everyone, to another session of FireBytes Traffic Management 102. This session, we're actually going to, rather than just focusing on blocking and denying certain traffic, we're actually going to go beyond that, go beyond allow or deny for applications, and start to look at how we can control those better. The perfect case in point, I used to work in education, and there was a time that we actually had a trainer come in, talk to the teachers, and said, what a wonderful tool Pandora is in the classroom. It sets the students' moods up. And then as a network administrator the next day, you can imagine my surprise when, 1,000 teachers wanted to have Pandora in the classroom. And obviously, without having those tools to properly manage the network applications, your usage can quadruple and take all of your bandwidth. So today we're going to, again, build on taking it beyond the 102 session that Chris did last month. And just to recap what Chris went over. So Traffic Management 101 review, we did release a lot of new features in 11.9 to include a wide variety of use cases, such as limiting web traffic for all users on the trusted interface, for instance, allowing 2 megabits per second and 1 megabit per second upload, guaranteeing bandwidth for a specific user, setting maximum and guaranteed for IP addresses. So again, rather than delving too deeply into that review, we're going to simply build on that today and take it to the next level as well. So with application control, traffic management, you can use traffic management or actions with application when you want to limit the bandwidth used by certain applications. And don't worry, we're going to go over a few slides today, and then we'll go into a more hands-on environment as well. So it can be a good alternative to blocking applications completely. If you have an application control subscription, you can also use traffic management or traffic control actions to control the bandwidth used by applications and application categories. So that's the key, is that you have to have that application control subscription. If you apply a traffic control action to an application category, all applications in the category will share the same bandwidth specified in the traffic management action. Unlike last month's session with 101, application control, there is no separate forward and reverse action, so the traffic management actions will apply in both directions for all policies. So those are just some key tips I wanted to bring to your attention as we dive into a little bit more on traffic management. Now, as we look at this, we look at traffic management policies. Obviously, there is a precedence order. So just, again, a couple of tips. You can configure the HTTP policy to use a traffic management action, and you can also configure application control to use an application such as video streaming applications as well. As we look at how WatchGuard is going to be able to handle that, the order of actions are being applied from most to least specific. So again, we're going to look at individual applications. If we don't have a policy for that, we're going to look at the application categories, and then overall we're going to look at the policy as well. And that's kind of how we're going to handle that priority on WatchGuard. So as we look at an example, again, here we are looking at using application control to limit the bandwidth used by streaming media to 100 kilobits per second per user. Now, in today's environment, that's not necessarily the most usable situation. So in my lab, the examples today, we're going to switch it up, and then we'll lower it at the end so you can see how that works. So some of the steps that we're going to go over today, we're going to enable traffic management settings. And as Chris mentioned, there are some things overall general settings that we need to address. We're going to take a look at the overview of how that traffic management policy, how we're going to control, for instance, streaming media while we're still allowing web browsing and controlling those in actually 2 traffic management actions. So we're going to take a max of 100 kilobits per second for World Wide Web category, just general surfing, And then we're going to take a max of 2 megabits per second for Pandora in the streaming medium. Then we're going to configure that, apply those configurations, and then end up monitoring those as well. Now, as Chris mentioned last session, again, I'm just covering it in the event that you weren't able to make the 101 session. But we need to enable traffic management and quality of service on the global settings. So the way we do that is simply go to Setup through Policy Manager, go into Global Settings, and then we have the dialog box that appears there. We're going to select the Networking tab right here, and we're going to select Enable All Traffic Management and Quality of Service Features checkbox, which is right here, and we're going to click OK. Now, for those of you that are interested, I am recording this, and I have the ability then afterwards to send out the link, so just let me know if you would like a copy of that. And then we're going to verify the OS compatibility settings. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have a number of new features with 11.9, and part of that is through Policy Manager, just telling the Policy Manager what operating system you're using, so whether or not those new features are available. So again, 11.9 is required for the features that we're talking about today. Now, just like we did last session with 101, we are going to go into Setup Actions, Traffic Management, and we're going to click on Add a New Policy. Now, as mentioned, there are 3 different policies that we can apply, or action types. So one is all policies. So again, we're going to look at all policies, and maybe we say as a school district, we only want 2 megabits per second as a maximum for Pandora. Or we can say per policy, so it applies individually to each policy that uses it. Within that policy, then we can say, you know what, we're going to have the middle school teachers, and we want 2 megabits per second to them. And that's a shared policy for all the middle school teachers. Now, as we look at a per IP address, now we're going to say, you know what, no single IP address needs to use more than X amount. And so it's extremely granular and flexible on what we're able to do. And then we're going to configure the action settings. So we have a maximum bandwidth, guaranteed bandwidth, and then maximum instance. Now, keep in mind that the maximum instance is per IP address only. So for instance, if I wanted to say every computer in my organization can only have a maximum of 2 megabits per second, it's going to give me 128 of those instances. For today's action, or today's example, we're only going to use the maximum bandwidth. And in your organization, you might say it's per IP address. For today, we're going to just use all policies example for that. So under the, just to delve in a little bit deeper on the action types, so if it's all policies, all 4 policies will share that defined 1 megabit per second maximum bandwidth if it's available. If it's per policy, each of the 4 policies individually can use the defined 1 megabits per second maximum bandwidth, and then obviously the per IP address, each one can use 1 megabit per second. Now, as we look at monitoring, I know a number of the engineers focus on a policy manager. You do have the flexibility of using the web UI as well for these tools. Just know that if you haven't checked out the changes with the web UI with 11.9, definitely worth a look. We've taken out all the Flash components, so in essence, you can use your iPad to manage your firewall if you needed to do that. So as we look at the traffic management statistics and graphs, they're available in that location, system status traffic management page. The chart will show the statistics for each selected action. And then in the FireBytes System Manager, hover over the action name to see the list of policies, applications, and source IP addresses that it applies to. And expand a per IP action to see statistics for each source IP address. Now, as we talk about this, and I mentioned the teachers, I still run into configurations where people are building policies in Policy Manager based on IPs or networks of IPs. You can certainly do that. However, with the flexibility of Active Directory tying in with single sign-on, having the splash page authentication, now we can start to build policy for groups of users through there as well. So just to recap, on the monitoring page for the trafficking management, we can see the two examples. We see that on the left side, the web UI, and then the right side shows the Firebox System Manager as well. So with that, let's go ahead and transition into my live environment here. It's taking a second for my virtual machines to come up. There we go. So I am running in a virtual sandbox environment. This is my policy manager, and we have our traffic management window behind it. I'm actually just going to go into filter or the policy tags. Again, a very cool tool. If you haven't checked that out, we're simply creating different filters on how to manage that. For instance, if I had none, I've seen some rule sets upwards of 200, 1,000 different rules. So real quick way to define, to narrow in what policies we want to look at. So as I mentioned, the first step is to go into Setup, Global Settings. We want to go into the Networking tab. From there, we can select Enable all traffic management and quality of service features. So again, all of the series of traffic management, 101 through 103, are going to require that you enable this traffic management and quality of service features. From there, the next step is to go under Setup, Actions, and look at your traffic management. Now we have two policies. Again, I'll just look at the first one, looking at max 1 kilobits per second per user. Now, I did have this on 100 kilobits per second for a user. However, as you can imagine, any web surfing that I was doing was incredibly painfully slow at 100 kilobits per second. So I'm just going to leave that at 1 megabit, and then at the end I'll lower that so you can see that buffering that's happening. We see some traffic going on currently. So again, we have the option to tie into all policies or per policy or per IP address. So for instance, if I wanted to address teachers versus students, I would be able to use per policy, or in some of your cases you might have managers, maybe it's bank tellers. And again, we have that option to tie it per user. Now where we actually see this, another area that we see traffic management being used as well is some organizations, they're not allowed to block, for instance, peer-to-peer networking, or maybe it's a college, they're not allowed to block them. So what they actually do is they go into and set 1 kilobits per second, which obviously is quite painfully slow, especially if that's shared between thousands of computers. So again, I'm just going to leave it at 1 megabits per second. And then I have this other one that's max 2 megabits per second per user. And this would be, for instance, my Pandora group where I don't want, or let's say per teacher group. And this would be where I didn't want the teachers to take 100% of the bandwidth, streaming Pandora, or maybe it's Apple TV, because we want that for mission critical network applications as well. So then the next step is to come into the policies, and as you can see here, we're taking that outside the proxy action. So only 2 features are, we have 2 features from WatchGuard available outside the proxy, and that's application control and IPS. Everything else is within the proxy. So as we look at this application control, again, you might be able to, you can create a new application control policy from here. or you could create ones to clone it, or we're going to actually edit because I have a pre-created one under here. Now, the first step I generally recommend is, as you're in this application control screen, is to select by category. Now, this allows us to, for instance, as we look at peer-to-peer, we could say drop. As I mentioned, you also have some organizations limiting it down to 1 kilobits per second. We could do that here. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is that there are, for instance, security protocols that you can block, for instance, bypass proxies and tunnels. You can block that or limit those here as well. But for today's session, we're going to be focusing on streaming media. So we're going to give that umbrella policy of using the max of 100 kilobits per second. Now, within that, obviously, Pandora needs to have a little bit more of 100 kilobits per second. So I'm going to just search for Pandora. I see it here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this action. By default, this is set up to drop. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and allow it. And again, we're in a specific application within this application category of streaming media. So again, we're going to apply traffic management. And this time we're going to choose the 2 megabits per second for that. We're going to click OK. And again, from the policy side, the category is trumped in this case by the application because we're more specific on that. We're going to go ahead and save it, which I have saved it. And now we're going to see that policy in action. So we see there's no usage. I'm going to go, for instance, to, let's just say, a sample web page. We're going to see that it's kicking up. We have some traffic under the 100 kilobits per second. In this case, I'm now going to go to Pandora, which it should come under this mobile application. And again, by hovering over, we can see exactly what policies are affected by that traffic management action. So let me turn down my sound here. And as we see the audio coming in, now we can see, for instance, traffic, and it's going to hit that 2 megabits per second. If I had 10 teachers running that, it would still be under that threshold of 2 megabits per second. So what I wanted to show you at this point is to prove we're going to limit this, truly make it 100 kilobits per second. So again, to do that, we go under Setup, Actions, Traffic Management, and we're going to show you how it's hitting that ceiling and keeping it right around that threshold. So we're going to say 100 kilobits per second, click OK. So again, we're taking that same streaming protocol, select by category, we're taking streaming media, we're applying a maximum of 100 kilobits per second, and then we're going to take Pandora again, just to recap, of having that 2 megabits per second. Now again, we could make that whatever we wanted for our environment, and just by limiting it, so the other feature of traffic management is if for whatever reason, let's say we're limiting Pandora to 2 megabits per second, it's not a guaranteed, it's a guarantee for that traffic, but if we don't have that traffic, if we don't have 2 megabits per second of Pandora traffic, that bandwidth is available for other applications, obviously. I just want to clarify that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this new config. Enter in a comment and save it to the Firebox. So now, as I pull up a web browser and I try to go to, for instance, Pandora, or let's go into REI again. We're going to see, for instance, that we're hitting this, and we should be capped out at that rate. We might actually have to lower it a little bit more. So we're at 59. Let's go into a large CNN. And that looks like it's going to cap it for us. So we see 81. It's keeping it under that maximum threshold of 100 kilobits per second. Now, if we raise that up, then we raise the cap on there, we would see that web page load considerably faster. But again, as I mentioned earlier, if you had anyone trying to surf at 100 kilobits per second, it's quite a painful experience. It's temporarily over 103, and then it's going to bring it right back down, buffer it down to that cap for us. Now, as we look at, a lot of people say, well, how do I know what kind of traffic that is? If you look in your traffic monitor and it's saying it's unresponsive because it's so slow, if we look at that traffic monitor, we can see, for instance, if we pause that under application identified, this will tell us where that policy is hitting. So, for instance, World Wide Web, HTTP. So if you wanted to address a particular policy or a website that you didn't know what category that was under, you can find the app name and then the category name as well right under here, network protocols. So this is how we can address different traffic patterns and then really start to address those traffic patterns through that filter. So again, as we look at this, let me just close this out. I'll raise the limit on that one more time so that we can see that CNN comes through considerably faster. So if we change this back from 100 kilobits per second to, let's say, 1 megabit per second, all policies. Now keep in mind, as I mentioned, we have per IP address. We can click on how many instances of that policy should be used. So I'll show that to you as well. Save that to the save the new config. On the config save, and let's try out CNN again. And it should be considerably more responsive. Or if we wanted to go to somewhere else, just to, let's go into, now as we look again at that traffic management component, we can actually see here the maximum instance. We see all those 128 clients in here. So those maximum instances will show the usage, the rate here as well, and it will show the individual users. And again, that's by changing it to from that global policy to a per IP address. So again, just to recap, if you wanted to have a group of teachers, or let's say of management, certainly you don't want to block management from getting into funny cat videos or what have you. You can build that policy here, changing that from an IP address to an actual group. And then we can go in and define the application control, the bandwidth for that particular policy. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your time. The next session that we actually have is Traffic Management 103, which is quality of service. And that'll be next month on that.